I see Diogenes' inscriptions scattered around Oinoandra as a gigantic jigsaw puzzle.
Burası yani bizim için çok değerli. Bu Oinoandra Antik Kent 1973 yılından beri bizim aile tarafından korunmaktadır. Bulduğum yazıtları Martin Ferguson Smith'e gösterdiğim zaman işte o cebinden çıkarır, bana bir tane şeker verirdi, sevinirdi. O kendisini buraya adamış birisi. Smith'in bana vermiş olduğu şekeri yiyorum ve kabuğunu da bu ağaca asıyorum.
Oinoandra çok yüksek bir yer. Biz yaklaşık 1400 metrede yükseklikteyiz. Oinoandra Lykya bölgesinde kuzey kenarda kalıyor.
Oinoandra öğren yerinin diğer öğren yerlerine göre bir ayrıcalığı var. Bahsettiğimiz kitabeler.
Biz bu Diyojen yazıt tanıyoruz.
His inscription is written in a way that it can be read by someone who has not studied philosophy.
O çok ilginç bir şey çünkü antik dünyanın en büyük yazıt tahmin edebiliriz.
Martin Smith estimates that it was large between 65 and 80 meters.
Onun yükseklik yaklaşık 3 metre 60 santim tahmin edebiliriz.
If Diogenes had lived today, he would undoubtedly have used the internet to propagate his message, and it would have been a lot easier and cheaper than doing it the way he chose to do it. I made my first visit to Oinoandra 43 years ago in 1968, and I came here making a kind of pilgrimage to see where this extraordinary man Diogenes set up his remarkable inscription. In the 19th century, French and then Austrian investigators had been here and found 88 pieces of the inscription, but then there had been no further work.
There is no other philosophical inscription of this extent anywhere in the ancient world. There is some parallel in the east of China where there are the Buddhistic rock inscriptions of the 5th, 6th century AD in the landscape, but here obviously we are not in the landscape, but here we are in a town. In this town, a stoa, which was a public building, contained moral and philosophical advice.
During my first days on the site in 1968, I rediscovered many of the pieces found in the 19th century, and then one day was having a picnic with a young Turkish villager from Ingialala. We came to this spot here and we sat down to have our lunch, and I had been drinking from a bottle, a fizzy drink, and I needed to something which to take the cap, the metal cap off the top of the bottle, so I used the top of this stone, which at that time was buried in the ground up to that point, and I could see some very worn letters there. When I studied the texts that had already been published, I realized it must be a new piece. So this was the start of quite an interesting and important story.
In 1884, among the first pieces which were found was this large stone, which contains some hint to the building on which the inscription was written. I think it would be nice to read Martin Smith's translation of these lines. Having already reached the sunset of my life, being almost on the verge of departure from the world on account of old age, I wanted, before being overtaken to death, to compose a fine anthem to celebrate the fullness of pleasure, and so to help now those who are well constituted. Now, if only one person or two or three or four or
five or six people were sick, as he puts it, with false opinions, he would visit them individually and give them the best advice he could. But in fact, most people are sick with false opinions.
And their number is increasing, for in mutual emulation they catch the disease from one another like sheep.
And he sees himself as a doctor. The idea that philosophy is a medicine for the mind, for the soul. This is very prominent in Epicurean philosophy.
It is right to help also generations to come, and because they belong to us, though they are still unborn. And besides, love of humanity prompts us to aid also the foreigners who come here.
He calls them all so-called foreigners because there's really no such thing as a foreigner, because the whole world is one country for human beings.
The inscription itself consisted in 7 stone layers, and this part here belongs to the lowest layer. It was a treatise on ethics, and below there run a line with maxims of Epicurus. This is very important because these maxims of Epicurus were already known to the scholars, and so from the missing parts we can deduce how large the inscription was.
We know from the inscription, from what Diogenes tells us in the preface to his Physics, which is also the preface to the whole inscription, that he had his inscription carved in a stoa, in a colonnade. But we do not know exactly where the stoa was, but we assume that it was on or very near the esplanade, which was the earlier marketplace or agora of the city in Hellenistic and early Roman period.
Above there was another layer about 40 centimeters high, which contained a writing on physics. Epicurean physics is an atomistic physics. That's very important because the model of physics in our days is still an atomistic model. Then, as a third layer, there were letters of Diogenes and maxims written by Diogenes himself on single stones. There was a fourth layer which also contained letters partially by Diogenes, partially attributed to Epicurus, and other 3 layers contained one single writing on old age.
Diogenes' inscription is an important part of the evidence for Epicureanism flourishing in the 2nd century AD.
Well, here we see a 10-line column writing, which is presumably a letter of Epicurus to his mother. The situation is a very common situation. A son is studying somewhere abroad, and the mother was obviously concerned about his income and whether he lived well. Epicurus was in Athens and his mother was not in Athens, and she had a dream, and her son appeared in the dream, and she believed this to be a bad sign. And Epicurus explains that dreams are nothing bad and so on. He says that his life is improving from day to day, and so his happiness is now godlike, isotheon.
And the Epicurean position was intermediate between those rival views. They didn't think that dreams are veridical, but at the same time they have a reality, as is shown by the effect which they can have on human beings, causing them, for example, if they have nightmares, to sweat with fear, or also there's mention here of erotic dreams causing the ejaculation of seamen.
Here our location is called Martin's Hill because Martin Smith in the 70s found many Diogenes blocks around here, and one of the most interesting is this one. It tells us the Epicurean concept of gods, and Diogenes criticizes the traditional concepts of gods as we find it in Homer. So in Homer we have gods who are angry, who don't control their temper. You have in the Greek mythology gods who have to serve other people, like Hercules, and Nemesis, who is angry, who is imagined by human beings as being angry.
Diogenes is arguing principally against the Stoic view that the god or the gods created the world for the benefit of themselves and of human beings, to be a joint city of human beings and gods. And Diogenes throws scorn on this idea and uses various arguments to combat it, pointing out, among other things, to the imperfections of the world.
And in this column, Diogenes states that our ideas about gods and also the representations of gods, the images of gods, should be friendly, and they should smile, so that when we see them, we don't have fear, but we also smile. If we speak about someone who enjoys his life, people normally think about those who are drinking and whatsoever. But certainly this is a short pleasure, and the day after is not always equally pleasant. So the Epicurean hedonism, which is the science of pleasure, we can call hedonism a sort of science of pleasure, analyzes the pleasures in a more rational way.
The Epicureans distinguished the pleasures of movement, kinetic pleasures, from the pleasures of rest, the static pleasures, which are more lasting and worthwhile, though not as intense.
The Epicurean philosophy believes that the soul after our death is dissolved, so that we don't have any more feelings after our death, and there is no paradise and no afterlife. So it is important that we do things right in our life, because the life is the only criterion for our happiness.
There were others in the ancient world who believed that pleasure is the highest good, notably the Cyrenaic school, who followed Aristippus of Cyrene. And they believed in the value of kinetic pleasures. The idea was that you should take as much pleasure as you could. I don't say entirely regardless of the effects, but there was a sharp difference of opinion between the Cyrenaics and the Epicureans. But many critics of Epicureanism in the ancient world didn't understand the Epicurean position properly, and accused the Epicureans of being only concerned with the pleasures of the stomach. That is totally unjust.
Diogenes writes that we just need a bit of bread, we need a place where to lay down, but it should just be of a nature that we don't feel pain afterwards, and we need some clothing, but it can be simple, it should not scratch us.
Bodily pleasure consists in freedom from pain, aponia, and mental pleasure is ataraxia, freedom from disturbance. When I was younger, I shared the view that Epicureanism might perhaps become something popular in today's world. I'm more cynical about that now, I think. But it was a philosophy, which was also a way of life, which people embraced over 7 centuries, 3 centuries BC and 4 centuries AD, and it worked for them. There's no reason why it shouldn't work for us, really.
The core of Epicurean philosophy is that we have to pay attention to our life which is happening now, and to think about the present times, not to worry too much about the future, and to enjoy the records of the past.
Epicureanism was, in the ancient world, a society of friends. Friendship was at the heart of Epicurean philosophy. So much so that Epicurus called friendship an immortal good, and by that he meant something more than ordinary human friendship, but the friendship and fellowship of human beings who share the same ideals and the same philosophy.
Epicureans differed from other philosophical schools. Epicurus, when he founded his school in Athens, he did not found it in a large stoa as the Stoics did, or in a gymnasium as Plato and Aristotle did, but he bought a garden, and in this garden there was a house, and everyone lived together. Also women lived in this community.
Epicurus himself had women in his school. He was the first Greek philosopher to admit them.
And they shared everything, and we are told that at a moment in which Athens was in difficulties, Epicurus gave the matters to survive for hundreds of people.
Burada bir kazı evinin, eğer bu olamayacaksa, bu eserlerin muhafaza edileceği güvenli bir mekanın oluşturulması gerekiyordu. Bugünkü yüzey araştırma ekibiyle görüştük. Kazı deposu dediğimiz metalden yapılmış ancak standartları ve yapım koşulları çok iyi olan bugünkü depo ortaya çıkartıldı ve ayrıca oradaki görevli personelimizin de kötü hava koşullarında kendisine sığınabileceği bir mekan oldu ayrıca.
The only scientific excavation to have been held at Oinoanda was in 1997. We excavated at 3 points on the esplanade. The small excavation we had here was very successful, but very limited. It would be good to excavate all along the line here.
Büyük bir kazı tabii öyle bir öğrenleri tamamen değiştiriyor. Mesela bütün eski ağaçlar kesmesi lazım. Demek bu hiç elememiş doğal yer çok değişiyor. Onun için biraz şüpheliyim. Belki küçük sondajlar bize gayet iyi bir sonuç verebilir.
Diogenes' inscription is not the only important thing at Oinoanda. We would like to find out much more about this area, which was very important in the Hellenistic and early Roman period.
Biz diyebiliriz epigraf uzmanlar için bu gerçekten bir Eldorado, bir çok zengin bir yer. Bu Diyojen yazıt var, bir Demostheneia yazıt var, ondan sonra üçüncü önemli yazıt var. Lycinia Flavia'nın mausoleum üzerinde yazmış yazıtlar.
If Diogenes were alive today, he would make exactly the same comments about contemporary society as he made about his own. Most people have false opinions. Look at wealthy people, look at powerful people in the world, politicians, so on. They don't really have happy lives. Diogenes would have given them the same advice as he gave his contemporaries. Limit your desires, live a quiet life, study philosophy, of course, and cultivate friendship. I was working on the hill some way away over there, and my young Turkish villager friend came back saying, "Martin Bey, yeni taşla buldum." And when he brought me down the slope here, I thought it can't be Diogenes, because no Diogenes pieces have been found in this part of the site. As I said, I was feeling rather ill. When I came into this doorway, I could not believe my eyes. 6 new fragments in one place. It was just extraordinary. Of course, on the one hand, I was very pleased. On the other hand, I was really rather ill, and I thought, how on earth am I going to record all these? So I had to photograph them, make squeezes and copy them and draw them, but it was all very exciting. And this, I think, is the single most important find that I've been involved in on this site. And whenever I come down this place, I kiss this stone, because I love Diogenes and I love the work here, the place, and this is so important.
Ağaçtaki kağıtları taşıyan bu kırmızı klasörü bir yapboz gibi görüyorum şimdi. Ve kendimi ardıç ağacındaki şifreleri aktaran bir ardıç kuşu gibi hissediyorum.